A deadly confrontation in Minneapolis has sparked protests across the country. From Los Angeles to the Twin Cities, anger over immigration enforcement is spilling into the streets. What began with the death of one woman has become a national flashpoint, drawing in protesters, police, federal agents, and politicians. At the heart of the storm, ICE, the White House, and a rapidly intensifying political crisis. A wave of anti-ICE protests swept through Los Angeles as hundreds of demonstrators gathered near a federal detention center. Chanting slogans and holding signs, protesters accused immigration authorities of excessive force and demanded accountability. The demonstrations were part of a nationwide weekend of action, coordinated protests erupting across multiple cities. As night fell in Los Angeles, tensions escalated. Police declared the gathering an unlawful assembly and issued dispersal orders. Footage shows clashes outside the detention facility, with officers pushing crowds back. Local media reported that several activists were detained as authorities moved to regain control of the area. The protests were sparked by the fatal shooting of 37-year-old Renee Nicole Good in Minneapolis on January 7th. Good was killed during a confrontation with ICE agents conducting an immigration operation. Her death ignited immediate outrage, with supporters calling it unjustified and demanding a full investigation. The Trump administration has forcefully defended federal agents. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem described Good's actions as domestic terrorism, claiming she weaponized her vehicle. President Donald Trump echoed that message online, calling Good very disorderly and alleging she violently resisted officers. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz rejected those claims, urging the public not to believe this propaganda machine. He called for a full, fair, and transparent investigation to determine what really happened. As federal reinforcements poured into Minneapolis, tensions between state officials and Washington intensified. The controversy deepened when Minnesota Democratic lawmakers were blocked from entering an immigration detention facility while attempting to conduct oversight. Representatives Ilhan Omar, Angie Craig, and Kelly Morrison said they were denied access despite their legal authority. Omar later said entry was only granted after intervention from longtime staff, raising fresh questions about transparency.
When we made it in, it was with the authorization of someone who's been here for a really long time, who understood that we had a congressional duty to enter the building and to see the facility. Shortly after we were let in, two officials came in and said that they received a message that we were no longer allowed to be in the building and that they were rescinding our invitation to come in and declining any further access to the building. What happened today is a blatant attempt to obstruct members of Congress from doing their oversight duties. When we appropriate funds as members of Congress, we are expected by the public to do oversight because the public requires their money be used with transparency and accountability. And what happened today is ICE agents deciding that we were no longer allowed to fulfill our constitutional duties. I will turn it.
Look, we're here because we're members of Congress. We have every right and responsibility, if we're doing our jobs, to be here today to see what the conditions are in that detention center. We are going to continue to show up. We're going to continue to do our job. We let ICE know, Department of Homeland Security know, that they were violating federal law. They do not care that they are violating federal law.
As a physician myself, I was very interested to see what the conditions inside were. We were very briefly allowed to go in, but we saw no beds. We saw a lot of young men sitting with their heads in their hands. We were not allowed to speak to any of them. I have privacy forms that I was ready to hand out to constituents. We are better than this. This is not what our great American project should be about. Sorry.
Well, this is just one more example of this administration and Kristi Noem violating the law. This is an out-of-control Trump's ICE. And what people at home should take is that they should call their Republican members of Congress. We need Minnesota Republicans, we need Republicans across this country to stand up to their own party. This is beyond the pale. This administration continues to use Minnesota as a political stunt. And earlier this week, it got a woman killed.
Americans are erupting. Anger is boiling. Streets are igniting. And at the eye of a nationwide firestorm is ICE. Chants of no ICE in our streets are thundering from coast to coast, cities to cities across the United States. The protests, triggered after ICE agents fatally killed a woman in Minneapolis and border agents shot and injured 2 people a day later in Portland, have only been intensifying. As a result, U.S. cities are erupting in anger. In Minneapolis, thousands marched on Saturday to protest the fatal shooting of Renee Good by a federal immigration officer. A coalition of migrant rights groups organized the demonstration that began in a park about half a mile from the residential neighborhood where the 37-year-old Good was shot on Wednesday.
I'm here at a park in Minneapolis, Minnesota, where thousands of people have gathered. They are protesting the presence of immigration enforcement in their city and calling for ICE and the Border Patrol to leave. Now they are here because they are angry. They are angry about the death earlier this week of Renee Good. She was a woman here in Minneapolis who was shot and killed by an ICE agent. This protest is part of a network of protests that are happening across the country right now. I've talked to the number of people who are here at the protest today, and they say they came because they want to make clear that they do not want ICE in their neighborhoods. They say that they want to protect their immigrant neighbors. They want them to feel safe here, and so they're coming to make their voice heard.
Amid growing outrage, Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey urges protesters to demonstrate peacefully. This comes as on Friday night, a protest outside a Minneapolis hotel that attracted about 1,000 people turned violent as people threw ice, snow, and rocks at officers.
I also want to acknowledge that the vast majority of people have protested peacefully, recognizing that I have seen community members sort of step into the breach, recognizing that there are others out there, agitators that are trying to rile up large crowds, and not only have they not taken the bait, they have pushed others back from the brink to say, hey, you know what? This is what Donald Trump wants. He wants us to take the bait. He wants those agitators to get a hold of this crowd in a way that it makes them cause harm to others and or damage to property. And so to them, I want to say my deepest thanks. We are so grateful for everything that you've been doing.
Arrests. There were 29 arrests last night. We are aware of one police officer that was injured from a chunk of ice that was thrown at them. Other than that, we are not aware of any other injuries.
Chaotic scenes erupted in Los Angeles amid anti-ICE protests. RT reported that an unknown substance scattered rioters from ICE HQ they stormed. Protesters in Austin, Texas are getting pelted with non-lethals after one of them burned a flag. Officers fired tear gas to disperse angry protesters. Up with liberation, down with deportation chants were reverberated in North Carolina. hundreds of protesters rallied at CCB Plaza and then staged a march through downtown, many dubbed ICE Out for Good, using the acronym for the federal agency Immigration and Customs Enforcement.
No, this isn't something I normally do. This is outside of what I would normally do. I don't really have any connections to the Democrats or the left, but what Trump is doing is psychotic. Because killing people in the streets in intimidation tactics is horrifying, and we can't allow it. We have to stand up.
Of course, the assumption is that this Justice Department is going to whitewash that case, absolve an officer of poor conduct at worst, at best.
What can protests like this do to...
I hope get people concerned. I hope get our legislators to grow what are called cojones, some guts, to assert their legitimate power under the Constitution.
Those are all lies. If you look at their policy against both Americans and their international policies, they follow the exact tenets and playbook of all fascist governments that we have seen in the 20th century.
Protesters against immigration enforcement took to the streets in Philadelphia after one federal officer fatally shot a woman in Minneapolis and another shot and wounded 2 people in Portland, Oregon. A large crowd marched through the streets and gathered outside the federal detention center, holding a sign reading "ICE Out for Good." In Boston, Massachusetts, hundreds gathered outside the JFK Federal Building to protest against ICE. The protesters denounced what they describe as abusive and unaccountable enforcement practices.
I think we're all gathered here because we're seeing that ICE is not a very serious public agency, not making us safer. People here are protesting the fact that this is a fascistic organization operating outside the scope of the law. We're not only seeing immigrant lives being taken, now we're seeing citizens being hurt and killed. So people here are not only protesting and demanding justice for the family of Renee Good, they're also here demanding an end of ICE. I personally think that we can't reform fascism. We can't reform brutality. So many of us are here to stand in solidarity, but also building a movement that will hopefully end this very unconstitutional agency.
We got ICE shooting women in the face for self-defense. It doesn't make any sense. So, like I said, let them come to Boston, Roxbury, Dorchester, Mattapan, Chelsea. Let them come around here with that, and let's see what's really going to happen to ICE. We really are going to touch them with our hands.
That's the thing. The one unifying principle is equal justice under law. That is what I believe in most fully, and that is what I believe Trump is flouting continuously, and it's unacceptable.
The demonstrations intensified as the U.S. Department of Homeland Security pushed forward in Minneapolis and Oregon, calling it its biggest ever immigration enforcement operation. From Minneapolis to Boston, from Oregon to Philadelphia, this is no longer just a protest. This is a national uprising, and the storm is only getting stronger.